This is Monday, February the 1st. This is American history. Now we know that in Roosevelt's second administration, he is going to use the Antiquities Act to incorporate more land into the Department of Interior. More national parks, more monuments, more forests. In all, over 150 million acres of land was placed into the National Park System, the National Forest System, and the National Monument System. Now, this is a very famous picture. Roosevelt on the left and John Muir, M-U-I-R, on the right. Muir had been from Scotland but had immigrated to America and had fallen in love with the American West. Now, Roosevelt and Muir are standing in front of Yosemite Falls from Yosemite National Park. Now, at the time, Yosemite was a state park, and Muir pushed hard for Roosevelt to make Yosemite a national park. Now, Yosemite was not the first national park. That was Yellowstone. And Yellowstone became a park during the Ulysses Grant II administration. But Roosevelt will incorporate more parks into the national park system than any other American president. Now, it is Yosemite and Grand Canyon that Roosevelt will begin to make the push that they become national parks. Neither one of them will be national parks during his second term, but they will become national parks during his lifetime. There are 6 other national parks that Roosevelt will push for. Here is another picture of Roosevelt, and he's standing in front of the Grand Canyon. Now again, Roosevelt felt that there were lands that had to be preserved and protected for future generations. And he said this is why the National Park System exists. This is a video about the national parks. Roosevelt encouraged all states to begin a conservation program, a wise use of their natural resources on their own. Missouri quickly adopted a conservation program. Now, here in Missouri today, when you go out and buy something, a penny of the sales tax goes to the Conservation Commission. They go out and buy land. They do studies for animals. They allow you to hunt and fish. And all of this is a wise use of land. Now, this here is Rockbridge State Park. It is the closest state park to Jefferson City. Surprisingly, state parks are not part of the Conservation Commission. They are part of the Department of Natural Resources. But state parks and Conservation Commission work together because all of the animals, all the plants in state parks are protected by the Conservation Commission. This here is from Bennett Springs. And if you've ever gone to fish in Bennett Springs, you know that you can fish for trout. Now, these trout are raised in these hatcheries here. And the Conservation Commission raises the fish, and then during trout season, and that will start the 1st of March, they will take a certain number of trout out of the holding pen, and they will put them in the waterway. And then the next morning, they will blow a horn, and at the blowing of the horn, you can start fishing. Now, you are limited to a certain number of fish a day, and you can only take home a certain number of fish. Now, you are told that to fish you must have a trout tank. And if you ever go to these places, you'll notice that the fishermen have it either on their hat or on their vest, and it should be prominently displayed. Heaven help you if you don't have that, because you can be fined. Well, it was during the second term of Theodore Roosevelt that Cuba began to write its constitution. Now, the Cuban Constitution had inserted in it the Platt Amendment. Now, Platt was a congressman from the United States, and he believed that Cuba needed our guidance. And so the Cuban Constitution said that the United States could meddle in Cuban affairs if we, the United States, felt there was a reason. Now, the Cubans allowed the United States a base at Guantanamo Bay. Now, the most populous city at that time was Santiago. And outside of Santiago is Guantanamo Bay. Now, the United States still maintains a base at Guantanamo Bay. The people who are terrorists are sometimes sent to Guantanamo Bay. During the Spanish-American War, the United States Navy was asked to send ships from the West Coast to help in the securing of Cuba. Well, that meant that our ships would have to go down the Pacific side of South America, then go through the Cape of Horn, then go up the Atlantic side of South America, and by the time they got to Cuba, the fighting was already over. President Roosevelt is going to go before Congress, and he's going to request a canal be built between the Pacific and the Atlantic. There were a couple of routes. Route number one was through the country of Nicaragua. Now, the Nicaragua route would be longer, but there would be no hills to climb. The shorter route was through Panama, but Panama had some high hills, which meant that we would have to make locks, and no lock had ever been built that big before. Enter the French. Now, this here is a French engineer by the name of Philippe Boisnard. Now, Philippe Boisnard had inspired a French company to build a canal in Panama. But the problem with building a canal in Panama, the French found out, was that so many of their workers were dying of yellow fever, they just couldn't make it work. Philippe Boisnard will approach congressmen and suggest that they should build the canal in Panama, not Nicaragua. Now, Philippe Boisnard will even go so far as to remind the congressman that Nicaragua had several active volcanoes, and that several of these volcanoes could erupt at any time and close off the canal. Now, Congress voted that Panama would be our choice, but there was another problem. Panama was not a free and independent country. Panama was part of Colombia. Now, the Colombians said they would be willing to sell Panama to the United States for $15 million. The United States said no, they only wanted to pay 10. Well, enter Philippe Boisnard. And Philippe Boisnard is going to inspire a revolution by Panamanians to overthrow the Colombian government in that area. Now, I got to tell you, this revolt would have never been able to happen had it not had U.S. support. U.S. gunships will be on both the Atlantic and Pacific side, and whenever the Colombian army is about ready to invade, the Americans will shell their positions. In time, Panama will declare itself a free and independent country. Well, now that they're a free and independent country, we need to have a treaty. The treaty becomes known as the Hay-Boina-Varilla Treaty. Boina-Varilla, the French engineer, has now been appointed foreign minister of the new country of Panama. The Hay-Boina-Varilla Treaty states that the United States will pay Panama $10 million for the use of the land, plus the American ships will pay a particular fee every time they pass through. Now, it will be up to the Americans to build the canal. Most European countries and most Latin American countries cried foul. They said that what the United States did in acquiring Panama was akin to robbery. Now, Panama called for reparation. The Roosevelt administration said no. Now, it won't be until Harding, and Harding is elected in 1920, that we will pay $25 million to Colombia, but this was only after the death of Theodore Roosevelt. Well, we've got the land, now we got to build the canal. There are two major obstacles. Obstacle number one is yellow fever. Now, yellow fever is a disease that when you get it, it attacks your liver and you become quite jaundiced, yellowish, and then you die. Now, we had no cure for yellow fever, but we knew what caused yellow fever. Yellow fever was carried by mosquitoes. Enter William Gorgas. William Gorgas is going to start an ambitious plan to eradicate mosquitoes. Gorgas theorized that if there were no more mosquitoes, there would be no more yellow fever. Now, please remember, Panama is in a rainforest, so it rains every day, so this is going to be a Herculean task. Enter George Goethals. Now, George Goethals was a railroad engineer. He had planned the route of the Great Northern Railroad. That's the route that connects Minneapolis to Seattle. And Goethals believed that the canal could be dug by cranes mounted on railroad cars. This is a picture of the canal being dug. You can see that one of the cars has a giant crane that scoops up the rock and the dirt. And then in the foreground, you can see where some railroad cars have been brought in to be filled up with the muck. And then it will be taken away and it will be dumped. Now, the hard part about the Panama Canal is not the dig. The hard part about the Panama Canal is the locks. No lock had ever been built that big before. And so this was a second task that Goethals had to counter. Now, you enter from one ocean, and the locks take you up in elevation. That means that a giant lake will have to be built literally on the tops of these hills. Then you go across the lake, and then you go down a series of locks. So each day, ships will enter from the Pacific side and go up to the lake. At the same time, ships will enter in the morning from the Atlantic side. They will meet each other in the lake, and then those that came in the morning on the Pacific side will go down the locks in the afternoon. Those who came during the morning from the Atlantic side will go down the Pacific side, and soon they will be out in the oceans. In 1914, The canal was completed, and the overall cost was $380 million. Now, this is paid for by American taxpayers. The canal today is considered one of the greatest engineering feats of mankind. This video here talks about part of the equipment used. Well, I think this would probably be a good place for us to stop. Tomorrow, we're going to look at Roosevelt and his dealings with the lands in Latin America and the Caribbean Sea. And tomorrow we will elect William Howard Taft to follow Teddy Roosevelt.